Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
General Assembly and the City of Richmond. I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have Delegate Marcus Simon with us. Good to see you, sir.
Good morning, Woody. How are you?
Good. Senator Scott Surovell, good to see you again.
Good morning. Happy to be back.
Absolutely. 2 weeks into this short session, how are things panning out as far as you are concerned?
We've actually done some pretty good bills in the Senate. Passed out ERA, we passed out non-discrimination in housing for LGBT Virginians. We passed out non-discrimination in state employment for LGBT Virginians. Unfortunately, ERA died yesterday in House Committee. We're also, the tax situation is becoming pretty untenable in terms of tax refunds and tax conformity. We haven't taken action on that's probably the most urgent issue that we have to deal with. We usually deal with it the first week of session, bringing Virginia's tax definitions up to speed with the federal definitions. And it takes an 80% vote to do it. And if we don't do it, then the state can't issue tax refund forms and people can't apply for their tax refunds in a couple weeks. We haven't done anything. And so that's becoming kind of a crisis, but that's something we need to deal with urgently. So I guess I don't know. I guess it's been a mixed bag. The first week was kind of good, but we're starting to get to the contentious stuff.
What about on the House side, Delegate?
Well, you know, it's interesting, Woody. We get a little bit slower start in the Senate, and I think part of the reason is that with the 100 members, the Speaker wants to sort of wait and see everything that's going to be filed. And so the filing deadline was just last week to get all the bills in. So now he sort of knows what he's dealing with and starting to deal it out to the different committees. And so this week has been a really busy week in committees. I had 4 bills up on Monday, 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. So we're starting to catch up with the Senate. Some of it, frankly, was to give a chance on some of these things to see what the Senate would do. So for instance, the ERA that Scott was talking about, Senator Surovell, that we were able to combine the House and Senate versions together in one hearing to kill them. But so we do things a little bit, get to a little slower start in the House, but things are really picking up now. And we're dealing with the same issue. It's interesting, it's sort of a lack of transparency. Everybody sort of knows that at some level, somewhere, people in the building are having conversations about tax conformity and tax policy and what to do about it. It's above my pay grade, so I'm not sure how that's going. But it's definitely something that it's starting to get to that really urgent stage. We really only have a few days left to figure out whether we're going to do this or not before it becomes a real crisis.
So, as I understand it, the Speaker has put all of those tax-related matters over into the Rules Committee.
Right, and so the Speaker got to use his rules as a clearinghouse or a holding pen, I guess. For instance, gambling bills and sports betting and casinos and everything. He's got all those bills in rules, and he'll decide with his small group of leadership folks which, if any of those bills, gets out. Same thing with the tax bills. It gives him an opportunity to have some leverage over those discussions and negotiations, and then the Rules Committee generally will then push them out to the committee that has the expertise, the subject matter committees on those. Sometimes they can go straight to the floor, and sometimes he'll use rules as a way to get things directly to the floor without going to any committee, just to get a test vote. We saw the senators have a little more of an interesting process to do that, but they can sometimes do the same thing.
What about ERA? Any chance it can get to the floor of the House?
I feel sort of like Jim Carrey in Dumb and Dumber. I mean, there's a chance, but it's pretty remote, and it would be a really difficult way to get it to the floor. So there's always some parliamentary maneuvers and motions that can be made, but it would take a bunch of Republicans really sticking the finger in the eye of the speaker, which is generally not in their best interest to make that happen. So I don't see a realistic path forward.
And Senator Surovell, I see you had an unfortunate reversal yesterday from last year in terms of your predatory lending legislation.
Yeah, that was kind of frustrating. So there's several different kinds of licenses in Virginia for financial institutions. There's one license called a consumer finance company license. It's been around since 1915. A lot of companies that have that license came to me and asked if I would put a bill in for a 36% rate cap on their loans, among other things, and also a prohibition so that car title lenders and other kinds of licensed entities like payday lenders and stuff couldn't have the same kind of business with a consumer finance company. And that bill passed the Senate 38-2 last year before it died in the House. This year, it died on committee 2 days ago by I think it was like a 8-5 vote, something like that. The predatory lending industry sees the consumer finance license as a vehicle for them to get legitimacy, and they want to keep that option open. And so they wanted to kill my bill so that they could hopefully eventually try to squeeze into that license. And the consumer finance companies don't want them there. They say you keep your predatory high interest, 400% interest loans in your own part of the code. And the committee was favorable to my view last year on that, but this year about 6 people changed their votes after the predatory lender guys stood up and said kill this bill. And so I'll be back next year. I mean, I think things are going to be different next year after we have an election.
What about electric utilities and undergrounding their facilities?
Yeah, so I have a bill in. We've had a real issue on the Route 1 corridor in Fairfax where we're trying to widen the road and just completely remake the Route 1 corridor. We're going to take Route 1 6 lanes or 3 lanes both ways, sidewalks, multi-use paths on both sides, a bus rapid transit down the middle, a 2-stop metro extension eventually, and a whole bunch of new density is going to go up. We're going to have about 80,000 people move on top of where 40,000 live today. So we're going to take the population from 40 to 120,000 people over about 20 years. And the community really would like to see the utilities undergrounded along that entire corridor while we're digging up the road and it's cheapest. Unfortunately, the state doesn't pay for that as part of a VDOT road widening. The only thing VDOT pays for is to move the lines, but not to bury them. VDOT will throw in the money that it would cost to move them towards an undergrounding, but the undergrounding has to be paid for by local government. And Fairfax County's just flat out refused to do anything about it. My 2 supervisors say they support it, but they just haven't come up with the money and haven't tried to come up with the money. And so I've put in a bill that would basically allow, if the Board of Supervisors says they want utilities undergrounded in a transit-oriented development involved in a road widening anywhere in Virginia, that cost can be passed on to ratepayers, so it's paid for by everybody in the state. Mm-hmm. Because I think underground utilities are really just part of the streetscape in these new multi-use, high-density, transit-oriented communities. Like Marcus, I think, has the Mosaic in Merrifield, which is beautiful. They just built that. It's an incredibly popular place people flock to go to dinner and see movies and stuff, and the utilities there are all undergrounded. That's sort of the new way of developing. And so my bill would say that all ratepayers pay for that instead of it, which would be very cheap for everybody, instead of it just being, the county having to come up with the cash.
So where is that now?
I think it's been referred to the Commerce and Labor Committee, which usually hears utility bills, and I just filed it on Friday, so it's still pending.
Okay. Delegate Simon, you've got a very interesting issue regarding a new technology. Tell us about that.
Well, it's interesting. It's one of these, sometimes these things are literally ripped from the headlines. And around the end of December, I read a story in the Washington Post about this face swapping technology that people are using. Women in particular are being harassed by folks who take images of the women's faces off of sometimes their social media. Sometimes they're been in a relationship with somebody. They have these pictures of their face, and they're literally with artificial intelligence using software to graft their face onto another person's body. Typically, somebody who's in a pornographic pose or in a pornographic video. And this isn't just still images now. This is videographic images, and then distributing those images to make it appear as if this person is engaged in pornographic acts and videotaped it on the internet. And some people came to me. I read it myself, but a number of people pinged me about it when they saw it, because about 5 years ago, when I first got here, I worked on this issue of what we call revenge pornography, where people in a relationship had exchanged photos during the relationship, and then somebody who had them after the relationship ended was using those images again to harass or intimidate or coerce or embarrass the person who gave them to them. So this is a sort of analogous situation, except that here, even someone who's, whether you think it's irresponsible or not, somebody who's never shared nude pictures of themselves can still be victimized in the same way using this face-changing technology. And the fact that it can be done with video in particular makes it really easy for people to believe that this is a real image and genuine, and hard for folks to deny it. So we're working on legislation now to add these falsified or fictitious images to our revenge porn statute, our unlawful dissemination statute. We want to be careful about how we do it. I mean, we're not trying to outlaw pornography, although some people would probably like to see that happen. That's not the intent of this bill. This is a very specific type, and only when it's done for a very specific purpose as well. There may be some legitimate reasons to do this, and it's funny, the Motion Picture Association of America, they use CGI and this kind of technology to do all kinds of things legitimately. So we got to make sure it's carefully tied to some malicious intent and malice, and we kind of went through that exercise once before, and so we think we can do this. And we have this issue with child pornography where people do digitally simulated child pornography. So we have some language that we can use, put those two statutes together, and I think we can help. We'll be the first state to even attempt to address the problem. Now, there'll always be problems of enforcement, knowing who's doing it and where they are, and why they did it, and getting jurisdiction over people. That won't solve the problem, but we could start to begin to address it here in Virginia.
A lot of implications and ramifications there. I understand that there's technology that also will include a voice with that video, and you can impersonate almost anyone in the world now, so it has political implications as well, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, this is just one small, narrow aspect of it, but right, I mean, there are implications for how we consume news. And part of I think the goal of some of these folks is you used to be able to at least believe what you see, believe your own eyes and ears. And now you can't necessarily do that. So even legitimate videos, when you see somebody on video, you see the president on video saying, it's my shutdown, I own it, blame me, can later say, that was doctored, that was altered. And so it just changes how we consume news, and that's a scary prospect. I don't know that that's something that we in the General Assembly are going to be able to fix.
The Amazon announcement, Senator, I know it doesn't directly affect your district, but I take it that it is a plus in terms of the economy for the Commonwealth.
Yeah, we actually just approved that deal in the Senate, I think on Monday. There's only about 4 or 5 votes against it, but I think the coming of Amazon is going to be a huge boon, not just to the entire state, but specifically to the 36th Senate District and those of us who live south of Old Town Alexandria. Especially with what we're looking to do on the Route 1 corridor, with all the new density in the condos and the metro extension, it's going to be a straight shot from Route 1 right up to Amazon. And we expect not only those 25,000 jobs to come in over 20 years, but a lot of other jobs and support jobs. I think other industries are going to flock there, and it's definitely going to create some housing demand our way, which is one more reason why we need to focus on affordable housing, because that part of Route 1 right now has sort of the biggest cluster of affordable housing in Fairfax County, and as that housing gets replaced and things come in, we have to make sure that we do it in a way that doesn't completely alter the character of the community and make it impossible for the people who live there now to stay. So we're facing some challenges on that, but I think Amazon net is a wonderful win for the Commonwealth. We're going to see a lot of new tax revenue, a lot of new jobs. The Virginia Tech facility that's coming in there, the $1 billion that Virginia Tech's going to invest is going to really improve STEM education in Virginia and Northern Virginia specifically. So I'm really excited about that deal.
Delegate Simon, same impact on you and your constituents?
It's a little bit different. We're just geographically a little more distant, but I think that it's going to have a positive effect on the whole region. My district includes a lot of what we used to call the orange silver line. So people still use Metro to get there. It'll still be an attractive place for people to live. Some of the executive types will come up towards Falls Church and McLean for the schools, we expect, even if the headquarters is down in Alexandria. Again, I agree with Senator Surovell. I mean, I think it's a net positive. We need to be careful about how we do it. We need to make sure that the benefits of having Amazon there are benefits for everyone, and that at every socioeconomic level, it provides great opportunities. I always get a little frustrated with the people that want to solve the traffic problem by destroying the local economy. I mean, we're seeing during this government shutdown right now, traffic's a breeze.
Yeah, it's great.
You can drive anywhere you want. So if your only goal is to deal with congestion, you don't want to bring more jobs. You don't want to have people working, but all the negative effects of the shutdown obviously are much greater. And so you don't do one for the other. We can't sacrifice economic development and diversification because we're worried about the traffic implications. We just have to have smarter solutions, sort of like what they're doing on Route 1, and start using BRT. Let's get creative about pedestrian access and making our communities livable, live, work, play in the same place so that people don't have to get in a car to do everything they need to do. So it'll create some challenges, no doubt, but nothing that we can't overcome. And I think we're smart enough to figure out how to mitigate the negative impacts while we still enjoy all the great benefits that Amazon's going to bring.
One-way tolls on 66 are probably down to like $30 in the shutdown. Right?
One-way tolls haven't gotten above 25 or 26.
In that regard, Senator Surovell, understand there may be some controversy around what may happen with I-81 and tolls there versus what your constituents are having to pay.
Yeah, they got some work to do on that 81 deal. When I read in the paper that they wanted to toll it, first of all, 81 needs to get fixed. There's no question about that. You go out there right now and you're dodging 18-wheelers the whole way down the road. They've got volume-based delays. They need to widen the road. But and I have no problem with them wanting to do tolls. But when I read that they want to give people who live in the Shenandoah Valley an easy pass and a $30 all year pass for all the tolls on 81, that made my head spin, because I have people that pay $30 a day. I have people that pay probably $50 a day, not only either using the I-95, 395 hot lanes or using the Beltway hot lanes to get to Tyson's Corner, closer to Doggett Simon's district. And just the idea that some other part of the state could pay $30 and get a free pass on tolls on their road for the whole year, to me was offensive. And that's a complete non-starter. That toll, if they want to pass, it ought to be closer to like $1,000 or something, or just not have a pass at all. So that we'll see what happens with 81. There's a lot of disagreement about it. Even the two Democratic senators in my caucus who represent 81 don't support the current deal. They would rather see a general tax increase that benefits the whole state, and then earmark some of that money to pay for the road instead of some weird toll deal because you don't like taxes, which is what some of the more conservative members want to see.
And Delegate Simon, how have those hot lanes affected your constituents?
It's interesting. I mean, I'm sort of in the situation of a lot of the locals on the I-81 corridor, if you want to look at it that way. There's in Falls Church and Merrifield, in the district I represent, people moved in close to be close to Metro and to have shorter commutes. The tolls are really for the folks that are coming in from further out and passing through, yet for our short hops and stuff, we still got to get on and pay tolls. So in some places it's been a real benefit. For instance, if I need to get from my house on 66 to 495, I can pay a 50-cent toll, and it saves me from having to drive up into Tyson's, get on Route 7 and come back down. So I can save 20, 30 minutes for 50 cents. And so it creates a new option for us, and I think that's been good. I do think that for folks that used to get up early in the morning to try and beat the tolls, they've got to get up an hour earlier now. You're trying to beat the tolls at 5:30 a.m. is not really plausible. For folks that drove hybrid vehicles so that they could drive. So for some of my constituents, it's made their lives more difficult. For some of us, it's we're a little bit of, I wouldn't say collateral damage, but unintended consequences, I think, of some of it. But generally speaking, it's not been a huge impact on the area. They're very unpopular still, no doubt about that. And I think what I really don't want to see happen, there have been some talk about doubling the tolling hours, and by doing that, by basically putting it in both directions.
Reverse tolling.
Yeah, the reverse tolling. And that would really affect, again, my constituents who've made a decision long ago to live where they did for there, and now to have to pay to get around all day long, essentially. Would be a non-starter for me.
So I take it would be a non-starter for you as well, Senator, that reverse tolling?
I'd be surprised if there's a single person in my district that has to deal with that. There might be a very, very small number. So that, I reverse tolling, I'd say when I lived in Arlington, that would have been an issue.
Right.
And I was working in Fairfax, but the people who I represent, even down to Prince William and Stafford, they're mostly going the direction of everybody else they're driving to Tyson's, they're driving to DC, the vast majority. So I haven't really studied whether or not reverse tolling or how people would feel about it in my district. It's really not a huge issue for me.
Another constitutional amendment which has several different versions, again this year, relates to redistricting. And apparently there's an order that most people have not seen yet dealing with the House of Delegates state legislative districts. And there's been a call for years and years for some type of nonpartisan or bipartisan redistricting commission. Right. How do you think that's all going to work out?
Right. I'll leave the districts to Marcus to talk about. That was news that came out last night, and it affects primarily his chamber, but it's going to affect whether a lot of my bills pass, I think, because I think there's going to be a lot of members on his side a little more interested in working with me. Actually the Senate Privileges and Elections Committee met yesterday to talk about nonpartisan redistricting, and they chose the Barker-Saslaw bill out of the different bills that were pending. And what's important for people to remember, I think I've met very few members who say that we ought to be picking our own voters, that we ought to be the ones drawing the districts. Most members agree that we need to have some kind of a commission involved that is made up, that has some non-members on it or all non-members on it, making decisions about where the lines ought to be. The trick is, last year we had some nonpartisan redistricting bills that were really partisan bills because of the way they structured their formulas in terms of what the committees had to do, where they said that certain things had to be prioritized. So, for example, there's the Virginia 21 or I can't 21 or 2021, I can't remember their name, but their Virginia 21 something. Their bill, which did not pass the committee, required this commission to minimize jurisdictional splits, to say you could only split a jurisdiction once, and that would result in some real partisan outcomes because of the way because of how partisan some of these localities are. And so, fortunately, that method didn't prevail. And so, we're doing something here that could affect generations of districts, and we have to be very careful. If we're going to chisel it into our Constitution, we need to be very careful about how we do it. And so I'm looking at the formulas and the variables very carefully to make sure that we're doing something that's truly nonpartisan and not something that's going to benefit one party over the other in terms of the methodology that's used. So I think there's a lot of pressure to do something this year. And this is the last year if we're going to do something this is the year, we have to start the process because of the way our constitutional amendment process works. If we don't get it done this year, we won't have it for the next redistricting.
Likely that there will be action in the House of Delegates this year?
Yeah, no, I think the House is interested in, we make it difficult to change the Constitution on purpose. I mean, both houses are going to have to agree to identical language, and then we have to have an election, and then the two houses newly made up will have to agree on that exact same language again, and then the voters have to vote on it. So we've got a ways to go there. But one of the reasons we know we need it is the House of Delegates, here we are in 2019, 8 years later, has been sued over the way they did redistricting in 2011. And it goes to Scott's point about how you pick these criteria. You've got to be careful that the criteria is not a cover for something else. And so what the court found was that all the Republicans said, oh no, we're just using partisan data. It was really racial data. And what ended up happening is, not to say data, but we ended up packing African Americans, particularly around Richmond and Hampton Roads, into very Democratic, very African American dense districts that were safe for the incumbents and safe for Democrats, but at their own expense, essentially. Because you didn't give them the opportunity to spread out over a couple different districts, they didn't have as much representation as they would or should have in the General Assembly. And the court found that kind of packing is unconstitutional and ordered the General Assembly to redraw their districts. We refused. We couldn't agree on how to do that. And so a special master was appointed by the court to draw new districts. And this is, I think there's 11 districts that started, but then the districts near them also get impacted as well. And the Court of Appeals,
31 districts.
31 districts that are impacted total. And the Court of Appeals, the Fourth Circuit just came out with their maps and their order, picking maps from among a bunch they were given by the special master to choose, which means that someone like Chris Jones, who's the chairman of appropriations, who had a fairly neutral district, but he did very well there, now is a strongly Democratic district. And if you look at past performance during the Obama elections, it's about an 8-point plus Democrat. That's not even factoring in all the new Democrats we found since Trump was elected. So he has a very strongly Democratic district now. Kirk Cox, the Speaker of the House, has a district that, if elections had been held that way in 2012, would probably have trended Democratic. So, knowing that they've got likely going to have different districts they're running in 2019 than what they ran in 2011, 13, 15, and 17. It may change their approach to legislation. It may make them want to move towards the middle or moderate or find at least a couple progressive ideas that they can embrace, knowing who they're going to have to appeal to in a general election in a few years.
ERA would be nice.
I want to give you a moment to talk about a group of students who were here with us yesterday, the Puller Institute. What's that all about?
So every year, I started this back when I was in the House of Delegates, and it was based on my predecessor, Chris Amundsen's idea. And basically what we do is we bring 7 or 8 high school seniors or juniors, to Richmond, and we immerse them in the Richmond process for 2.5 days. They come down here, they watch us in committee, they watch us on the floor, they meet with the governor, the lieutenant governor, cabinet officials, lobbyists, some interest groups. They tour things, and they get to see sort of how Richmond works. Where we come from, people tend to be very federally focused. The federal government, everybody works, or we have a lot of lobbyists and interest groups and association people, and the media cycle in Northern Virginia is just dominated by everything federal and very little about the state government like it is in the rest of the state. And so I think it's important to get our Northern Virginia kids focused on Richmond more to understand what we do. And it's most of them really enjoy it. They think it's a lot of fun. And I'm glad you guys were able to come in and interview them and get them to talk about what they got to see.
Yeah, they were great. They were very energetic, very bright, and I think that was their biggest aha moment. Stuff gets done here in Richmond.
Right.
Talk to us about campaign finance reform.
Well, I continue to work on this issue of trying to clean up the way we do campaign finance in Virginia. The governor's got a big package of reforms that he's proposed. But I've been focused on one area in particular since I ran in 2013, because it was a big surprise to me, which is that Virginia has really no limits on how candidates can spend their money. So we have no limits on how much money you can raise. We can get unlimited. So if you're watching, you can give me as much money as you want after session. I can get it from any source that I want. So corporations can give directly. They don't even have to go through PACs.
You have to be a citizen.
You have to be a citizen of the United States. So that's the only restriction we've got. And once I get it, there's no restriction on me converting my campaign funds to personal use as long as my committee's open. So my bill would ban the personal use of campaign funds at the very least.
That's a problem.
We got to be able to say you've got to at least spend these things on campaign-related activities. We got a fairly weak bill out of the House last year. It didn't do very well in the Senate. We've got that bill. It hasn't been scheduled for a hearing yet. I hope that the Republicans are still interested in this issue. As you know, with one of Scott's bills, sometimes we take a step backward from year to year. It's not always a march forward, but I think we've got some language there, and I'm going to continue to push that issue forward, as well as, again, embracing some of the governor's proposals to put a $10,000 person limit. I think is pretty reasonable as far as a contribution cap, and to ban corporations from giving the money directly with no real accountability. I mean, you can create an LLC. You don't have to disclose the identity of any of your members or where any of your money comes from, and you can start doling out checks to anybody with really no transparency at all. So I think we need to bring some transparency to the process.
Great. Well, thank you both for being here, Senator Scott Surovell, Delegate Marcus Simon. Good to see you both. Good luck.
Thanks
for
Woody.
having us. Thanks.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.